Welcome to the Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. On Tuesday, Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, gave a robust speech to the World Economic Forum at Davos, where he essentially declared the end of the post-World War II international order. But what he said about countries like Canada, knowing that this international order was hypocritically struck a chord with Africans, we have long been at the receiving end of this hypocrisy. Now that it's out in the open, are we ready for the rapture? Nigeria has signed a long-awaited MOU with Abu Dhabi Ports Group to collaborate on port development, maritime logistics, and digital solutions, strengthening Nigeria's UAE economic ties. The deal, discussed for over 2 decades, signals renewed momentum in Nigeria's maritime and blue economy agenda. Could this partnership finally unlock modern, global, competitive ports for Nigeria? African economies are strengthening trade and investment ties with major powers as Kenya moves closer to duty-free access for more exports to China and pursues a major state asset sale to attract private capital. At the same time, the DRC is countering US investors to deepen cooperation in critical minerals and mining. Is Africa successfully balancing global partnership to drive growth and reduce fiscal pressure? Joining us today for further insights is Confidence Makari. He's a security analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Confidence, to the podcast.
Hello, Veronica. I didn't know that I'm going to make it back here so soon, but here I am. So hello to our listeners.
It's always great to have you on. Let's start with Davos. So, everybody basically is in Davos right now. And this has been stated to
Except you and I. Except you and I.
except you
We
and
are
I know. I wish I went. In the near
okay.
future, we will go.
Okay.
So right now we're
Okay.
seeing, and this has been the most discussed Davos of all times. We're seeing a lot of world leaders trooping in companies. And one of the critical speeches made, apart from, Donald Trump, we had El Fattah as LCC of Egypt. We also had Makari of Canada, the Prime Minister, speak on the global order and Africa's position. He openly acknowledged the hypocrisy of the post-World War II international order, something Africans have experienced for decades. Is that order is truly breaking down, and what strategic choices must African countries make to avoid being passive casualties of this rupture? So, if you can give us your thoughts on, the speech, what happened, what's happening in Davos as well, that would be great.
All right. We first of all need to, while dissecting Carney's Davos' speech, we first of all appreciate the background as to where Carney is coming from. The current world order, or the one that we know that is fracturing today, was instituted in 1943. At least that was when the idea came. The US president at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, met with some of his foreign policy advisors in Washington and decided to set up a better international organization away from the League of Nations that had existed before World War One, or after World War One, rather, to prevent another world war from happening. And one of the key failures many people have attributed to the League of Nations is America's refusal to join. Even though the 14th agenda that led to the creation of the League of Nations was coined by President Woodrow Wilson, American Parliament, which we now know as Congress, simply refused to ratify it because America was at the peak of its isolationist phase, refusing to entangle itself with the affairs of the world and with the affairs of men. if I should say so myself. But FDR, given all of his executive authority that the Second World War brought and America's involvement, decided to craft that institution. And then he got the input of Mr. Churchill in the United Kingdom, who was Prime Minister at the time, as well as Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. So these three were the key leaders, and the fundamentalism that shaped that post-war order was the Atlantic Charter that talked about the freedom of all people. But beyond the Atlantic Charter, we saw things like the New World Order is supposed to have more integration through trade, equal access to the sea, and both of which will lead to less opportunities for fighting. The Europeans keyed in on this project beyond the Marshall Plan, and they came up with the European Economic and Steel Union, which before that was known as the I think the Benelux countries coming together to form to connect their economies together through steel. And over time, it expanded and expanded and renamed itself to what we now know as the European Union. I think the latest iteration was with the Maastricht Treaty of 2004, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check back on that. The point I'm making is America designed this order as we know it, with international law, being the imprimatur of state relations with each other. So, for 80 years, the design of the plan was that many of these other countries that have been each other for starting from the 30 years in the led to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 will simply stop fighting and try to negotiate their way and using legal means to solve disputes such as the World Court, the ICJ, and in 1999, 2002, the International Criminal Court to stop people from committing crimes against humanity. Right now in 2026, that world order, which is known as the liberal world order, is crittering. And one of the reasons it is crittering is because we have people in charge of the United States today who were either not born when the United Nations idea was formulated and the idea of the liberal world order, which gave birth to institutions like the UN, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is GATT, and the WTO as we know it today, when they weren't born or they were not alive when all of those things were being formed. So they have appreciation for that. Most of what they've known all of their lives, abundance, America's power as they know it, and many of these other people who are now wielding America's power and influence all the while simply did not understand or did not appreciate what one would call restraint. Many of the times in historical times when we've seen empires being challenged, more often than not, the idea that goes beyond that goes to the that goes into a coalition of countries coming together to challenge the empire is because the empire refuses to exercise restraint. In the current iteration, we've seen in 2026 the United States extraordinarily renditioning a sitting head of state in Venezuela, taking him to the US uh, for trial on charges bordering on drugs, drug trafficking, and the likes. We've seen that happen 40 or 50 years before. Many people have attributed this kind of politics to real politics in the sense that it's something that dates back to the Melian dialogue, where Athens simply told Melos in the Peloponnesian War of that time that the weak was the strong must suffer, the strong must do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must. But my argument is that this is not real politics. This is match politics. The difference between match politics and real politics is not necessarily that they are just different branches of the school of realism. It's also the fact that real politics simply means you have an interest, but you must look at your position, look at your interest, and look at your power, and use those two things relative to each other to shape your foreign policy. If you can get that piece of territory, let's say this is 1870, and Bismarck, being Chancellor of Germany, of Unified Germany, is going to war with France over Alsace-Lorraine. realpolitik would say that yes, Germany can be able to defeat France, then try to dismantle every other alliance that France may decide to bring. Maybe not necessarily by force, but by diplomatic hand wringing. That could be defined as realpolitik, using your own relative strength to define your foreign policy in terms of your interests. But match politic is not that. Match politic is having power and using power for the sake of having power and using power. This is what the Trump administration guys are doing. And as a result of that, that kind of thinking, not even real politics now, because real politics as an ideology is not going to tell you to go on and attack your friends. It's not going to tell you that you should take Canada, which has been your long-standing ally since the war in 1812 ended. It's not going to tell you to go and want to take Greenland, which is the territory of your NATO ally. It's not going to tell you to want to overthrow countries simply because they're your hemisphere and they're not doing what you want. That is not real politics. That is match politics. And this is having what is pushing many people in the Trump administration. There's J.D. Vance being the vice president, Stephen Miller being the deputy chief of planning, deputy chief of staff in charge of planning at the White House. We tend to see that many of America's traditional allies are no longer being happy about what is existing. And so Carney's speech, in a way and manner, is trying to acknowledge that the old order that many of us grew up in, where there's been peace in the world for the past 80 years, and there has been no interruption in terms of a major war between major powers, is ended. Yes, Carney may have made the speech with starting with Václav Havel, a dissident, a communist dissident in the 1970s, that the stuff is hypocritical. It might have been hypocritical that I'm talking about the world order or the liberal world order. It might have been hypocritical to a certain extent because many smaller countries in Africa and parts of the world have always said that it is not democratic enough because I mean, if you take dispute cases to the World Trade Organization, being a small African country, there's a higher chance that the WTO is going to rule against China is cheating according to the US. China is cheating trade rules and everything. Yes, that was a system, and with all human systems, they're imperfect. But the important thing is that the system held in the sense that its most fundamental imperative is to prevent a war between the major powers. So for the past 80 years, it has held. But now that the Americans are now breaking faith with their allies, Kanye is now saying that, see, we do not have to participate in this charade anymore. It has ended, and for all intents and purposes, let us just get on with it. Let us trade with each other away from the United States. Let us pool our resources. Let us have a coalition of middle powers. But for what it involves for us as Africans here is that number one, many of our arguments against the liberal-based world order or the liberal world order has come to light in the sense that the people who refuse to acknowledge that this particular thing has been biased against third world countries, they are now saying it. They're saying it quite out loud. And apart from that, number two, it now gives us a clear eye to be able to engage with whoever comes. So in the past, before the Trump administration, we used to have Westerners coming to us, not necessarily for trade, but mostly from a patrilineal and or patriotic sense, where they lecture us about human rights and democracy, lecture us about fair elections and the likes, while trying to do unfair trade practices. Now all of those pretenses are gone. So everybody now is in international relations for what the person can get. Block trade or bilateral trade, none of the pretenses hold anymore. And as a result, I think it provides us with an opportunity to be clear-eyed in our dealings. Thankfully, for many African countries or their heads of state, the America we they see today, it's not the America of 10, 15 years ago. So if Washington comes with its own interest, it is mostly coming with very naked interest. Let us do a deal. If you don't want to do a deal, get out of the way. And many African countries will have to adapt in this new reality. And so we'll be adapting, or in terms of away from adaptation, we'll be relating with countries based on how both of them can mutually benefit. And I hope that going forward, we can be able to pull our strengths together as a people and then relate with the world based on the new world order that we are seeing at the moment that is really close to us.
I agree with you. I mean, 2026 has started on this roll. It seems like a roller coaster, but let's see where this roller coaster takes us.
Hmm.
Um, On to our second story where on the Nigerian port deal with Abu Dhabi. So Nigeria's MOU with Abu Dhabi Group has been over 2 decades in the making. What should Nigerians watch closely to ensure that this partnership delivers real improvements in the port's efficiency, the digitization, and the competitiveness, rather than becoming another stall infrastructural promise for the country?
I think it was sometime in 2020 that the Buhari administration decided to launch the Deep Blue project to improve the Nigeria's blue economy, also known as the maritime economy. And I don't think the Buhari administration took it seriously beyond the security aspect. The UAE is quite proficient or prolific in doing port deals. They've been doing port deals in several parts of the country. In Egypt, um, I'm looking at the list in front of me now. In Egypt and Kazakhstan, they had green and logistics projects doubled, where professional trade has surged. In Vietnam, they had deals that modernized ports with digital tools, while Spanish shipyard acquisitions boosted offshore wind in Europe. They also had deals with Bahrain and the enhanced maritime repairs, in that particular region. These are some of the things that Nigeria could gain in terms of its dealings with the UAE in sports development. However, some of the pitfalls that we have to watch is we have to look away from, or we have to be, should I say, we have to be careful of the corruption that comes with port management. See, port management is not rocket science, but many of our people in Nigeria, especially in the government circles, have treated it as such. For many people who tend to think that there is a conspiracy to make only Lagos ports functional, then leaving other ports like One, I think there's another one in Calabar. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There are ports in Warri. I think there are two other ports. They are simply not as operational as they're simply not as operational as Apapa and Tinkham ports. So this is an opportunity for the UAE to work to get those ports operational. So we have to be careful of some of the organizational inertia in terms of trying to frustrate the whole thing, where this would be a very important deal that is signed on paper, but when implementation comes, there'll be so many bottlenecks, so many delays, so many insincerity, and so many kickbacks, in a manner of speaking, that some of the people who are supposed to implement this agreement would be seeking. Um, if we have an administration that is very, very big on international trade, I mean, I saw the numbers the other day, and we seem to have a little bit of a trade surplus in the sense that I think at the last quarter of last year, um, we had significant trade surplus of about 12 trillion. I may have to check that figure. This is just one of several ways that the economy can be improved. What the UAE would face in terms of trying to get Nigeria's ports up and running, at the very least, the most immediate challenges will then be in the security of these ports. Piracy in the Gulf of Guinea is no longer as high as it used to be, but there are still incidents. I think the International Maritime Bureau in 2025 listed about 7 incidents within a year or two. In 2021, that particular waterway was the most terrorized in the world. But with an international consortium of countries and Nigeria's Navy, who have mostly focused on, oil theft and the likes, insecurity on those waterways have reduced. But I do think that, like flies being attracted to sugar, some of these things that we are seeing in terms of UAE implementation of the deal and the MOU to increase port efficiency and the likes will in the future drag some of these guys out of the waterways by which they've been pursued. So it's something that Nigerian security agencies, especially the Navy and its allied agencies, will have to look into in the coming days.
Thank you. Interesting, really. And on to our final story where we have Africa's Global Economic Balancing Act, where we have Kenya deepening trade ties with China. We're seeing DRC cutting the US investors in critical minerals, and other African countries kind of diversifying partnerships. What are your thoughts? Is Africa finally learning how to leverage global competition to its advantage? Or does this risk creating a new form of dependency for African nations?
Um, sorry. So the thing I want to say about this is, I think it's a continuation of the first conversation we we had concerning Davos and Carney. Look, again, ever since the Trump administration returned to office 1 year ago, we have practically seen a lot of deal making, not just in Africa but across the world. Trump likes to take credit for a lot of the deals that have led to peace in the world, even though he cannot seem to shake off the Ukraine baggage from him giving out tough Putin has been in terms of negotiations. But some people who have paid attention to the new sheriff in town are Congo and Rwanda over the M23 theme. And as such, they have sort of latched onto it and they've understood, they read the tea leaves, they read the signs on the wall, that this is no longer a thing where somebody has patience to come and be saying, stop fighting, let's look at these issues, let's go down to the heart of the matter and try to find a historical solution. Nobody has time for all of those BS anymore. And I think last year I wrote an article on it stating how deadly and dangerous it will be for Africa's geopolitics and stability in the future. But the important thing I want to note here is that many of these other countries are now taking advantage of the rivalry between East and West. So look at Kenya, for instance. Kenya has a preliminary trade arrangement with China that will grant it duty-free entry for 98% of its exports. And some of these exports includes tea and coffee. And the aim is a narrowing of the $3.7 billion deficit from where agricultural shipments, could rise by $1 billion yearly. You know. So the Americans are looking at this, especially Kenya's quote unquote undue closeness to China. And they are angry. I think it was sometime late last year that I saw a couple of rumbles on the pages of some foreign policy, DC foreign policy establishment guys who were begging the Trump administration or urging the Trump administration to rescind Kenya's status as a major non-NATO ally. You know, and the Trump administration hasn't answered them because I think, given how attentive they are, people trying to shortchange them is something that we have to revisit in the future. But the Kenyans are getting on with it. They are shaking off America's criticisms and they're getting on with it. You know, and the DRC itself is also trying to get is also trying to get on the other hand, trying to be a lot more closer to the US, presenting things like what is it called? Manganese, copper, cobalt, gold, lithium, and everything to American companies. You know, it's insane. It's insane. And one of the reasons why it is insane is that in the past, where we used to have a lot of Western powers trying to cut deals with corrupt African leaders, or try to resolve them, or try to ensue chaos. Nowadays, the Western leaders just simply do not care anymore. Anybody who gets into power, they just get it done, and all of that. Again, it's down to the fact that some of these African countries are reading the signs on the wall, and then they're acting accordingly. Is it a good thing? Yes. Why I say it's a good thing is for a long time, many analysts have been looking at the situation and have decried the rose-tinted views by which African states have viewed geopolitics. They had wished for a much more clear-eyed, interest-based application to foreign policy, and I think they will be happy, the ones that are dead and the ones that are alive will be happy to see that some of these things are not yielding results. But the drawback to some of these things is, given the large scale of corruption on the continent, there is not much confidence that these deals are going to improve the local economies beyond enriching the pockets of a few. It's not going to bring development. It's not going to improve the GDP per capita of many of these countries. And the Trump administration and the US and the West in general are simply do not care. So they're simply following the Chinese blueprints where anybody who gets into office through whatever way doesn't matter to the Chinese as long what matters is Chinese interest. So that is where the good news ends. The bad news, again, to further stretch the argument, is that to piggyback on the argument I was building, many of all of these powers look at the old situation and there is no genuine stake because they feel that if you as a country as a countryman, if you as a president do not really feel that you have a stake in your country's development, they don't really care about it. So every bad actor can just simply come in, get whatever they want. As a matter of fact, even mess up the environments where they are working and just get their extraction out and get on with it. This is really, really bad. There has to be accountability mechanisms by which, whenever you see things like this, if you take the matter to a domestic court or you take the matter to international court, you can seek redress. I don't think all of the atrocities that Shell committed in Nigeria that got them into a lot of international legal trouble, if they started committing those crimes today, environmental crimes, I don't think those people who are suing them are going to seek redress. And that is what worries me more about this renewed international attention on Africa.
Interesting. I mean, I agree with you as well as it's good for Africa, right? And I mean, the most important thing is that Africa is able to take as much advantage as they can. That's
Mhm.
all for today. Thank you very much, Confidence, for joining us and sharing your perspective as well.
Thank you once again for having me.
You're welcome. To all our listeners,
Mhm.
this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, and share. And let us know your thoughts. We'd like to hear back from you as well, your thoughts in the comment section. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates that are shaping the African continent. Thank you.